Hello everybody, this is Jansaurus here, bringing you another budget commander deck, this time on Karametra, God of Harvest. This is obviously more of like a Thanksgiving theme, dealing with like the harvest of the pilgrims and that sort of thing. Sorry it's about a week late, due to my job being crazy. So, here we go. Karametra, God of the Harvest, is a legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, and as long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, Karametra isn't a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So Karametra gives you a ton of ramp for mid to late game. And so what we want to do is, this is mostly a creature-based deck that focuses on landfall and also focuses on just overwhelming your opponent with the significant ramp and the amount of creatures that we have on the field. Alright, let's start off with a little bit of ramp. So, first off, we got Beanstalk Giant. This is a great card because not only does it ramp you at the very beginning, it's also a creature spell, which then triggers off Karametra. So search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, and then Beanstalk's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. Farhaven Elf. This basically gets you 2 lands with our commander, and that's the main reason why most of our ramp actually comes from creatures. So, when Farhaven Elf enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Sakura Tribe Elder. Sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Wood Elves. When Wood Elves comes into play, search your library for a forest card and put that forest into play, shuffle your library afterwards. And then we have some more traditional ramp. We have Cultivate. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those, put one onto the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand. Migration Path. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped. Druid Class. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Then you can level it up to level 2. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and then you can level it up again to when this class becomes level 3, target land you control becomes a creature with haste, and this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. It is still a land. You mostly never want to actually hit level 5, but if you are in a pinch, you can use this to maybe close out the game after a board wipe. And Colony Heart Expedition. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on this card. Whenever you remove 3 quest counters from Colony and sacrifice it, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. And then we have a little bit of different ways to ramp. We have Arcane Signet. You tap, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. And then we have Oketra's Monument. White creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior token with vigilance. Ronus, green creatures spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Guildless Commons. Now this is a very important card in my opinion. Not only does it let you basically get a additional landfall trigger for free, it is that's mainly the biggest reason it's here. It's just a very neat little trick you can do in this deck. Now we're going on to card draw. First we have Beast Whisperer. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. Fierce Empath is a tutor. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or greater. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Primordial Sage, for whenever you cast a creature spell, you just draw a card. Soul of the Harvest, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So both Primordial Sage and Soul of the Harvest are pretty good targets for Fierce Empath. And next we got Harmonize. Just draw 3 cards. Secret Rendezvous is you and target opponent each draws 3 cards. You can use this as more of a political tool, or you could also use it as, let's say I don't have a whole lot of exile removal or spot removal in this deck. You can target the player who's playing black mana and hope that he gets either something that can deal with the spot removal that your deck just might not have at the moment. Shamanic Revelation, draw a card for each creature you control, and then you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power +4 or greater. And then we have Life Crafter's Bestiary. At the beginning of your upkeep, you scry 1. That's not necessarily card advantage, but it is card selection, and that can be huge. But whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay green, and when you do, draw a card. So we can end up drawing an absurd amount of cards throughout our deck and just quickly find an answer to whatever problem we have, or just continue to give us more gas to run over our opponents with. Alright, now to the fun part of the deck. We're going to do a little bit of Landfall. A Domination Angel. Whenever a land enters your battlefield under your control, you may exile target non-land permanent other than Admonition Angel. When Admonition Angel leaves the battlefield, return all cards exiled with it to the battlefield under their owner's control. So you can use this to get additional enter the battlefield triggers with this, or you could try and remove the best blockers that a person has. You run into a little bit of a situation where you might be at a worse state during a board wipe if you do that, but if you're trying to close out the game, that would also be a very good way to use that landfall trigger. Corsair of Krufix, play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land card, and when a land card enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. This is mostly there just to possibly pull lands off the top of your library. Amiria Shepherd. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If that land is a plains, you may return that non-land permanent card to the battlefield instead. So this can just give you a ton of recursion, get your best creatures back out, and quickly reestablish a board after all things are said and done. Maha Bretrid Protector. Retrograde Protector. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, so he is a lord. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white human warrior token. Maraza Rootgrazer has vigilance, and whenever you can tap it and put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield, but it can also return target basic land you control to its owner's hand. So you can always use this to either ramp yourself or get additional landfall triggers off of lands you have already played. So it is a very, very great card to just facilitate your plays. Oran Reef Hydra. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Hydra, and if the land is a forest, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this card instead. Rampage and Baloths. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. And Scoot Swarm. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So, I'm not, like, there is the possibility that you could win with this card. I'm not saying that. It'll never win you the card. People are absolutely terrified of this card. They will burn their biggest burn spell, or they will kill this as quickly as they can because they know the snowball potential that this card has. Because of that, you might not ever actually finish the game with a Scoot Swarm, but just that threat freaks people out to no end. Tireless Provisioner. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. Trove Warden. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. And when Trove Warden dies, put each permanent card exiled with it onto the battlefield under the controller of that card's owner. So yes, you can hit your opponent's stuff. You can use that more of as a little bit of a political tool. Maybe if someone has a very key utility creature in their graveyard, you can use this to at least get it back, and then maybe they'll kill it and get it back. Kill Trove Warden and get it back. But mostly this is here to try and get extra triggers off of or extra value out of your graveyard, such as Tireless Provisioner or some of our other ramp creatures. Zendikar's Royal. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 green elemental creature token on the battlefield. Feldar Retreat. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1, create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain vigilance till the end of the turn. So Zendikar's Royal and Feldar Retreat can just make our board absolutely crazy wide, and then Feldar's Retreat also has the added benefit of making all of our creatures bigger and attacking without really having to worry about a crackback. Alright, we're going to go on to some of our utility creatures, starting off with Archetype of Endurance. Creatures you control have hexproof, and creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and can't gain or have hexproof. So this is an awesome card. It pretty much just makes us vulnerable to board wipes at that point. Spot removal is no longer an issue whatsoever with Archetype of Endurance. So Archon of Valor's Reach. Flying, Vigilance, Trample. As Archon of Valor's Reach enters the battlefield, choose artifact, enchantment, instant, sorcery, or planeswalker. Players can't cast spells of the chosen type. So imagine going against an Enchantress deck and slapping this down after finding it with a Fierce Empath. That Enchantress deck is no longer a threat for the rest of the game. They just pretty much can't play Magic until they deal with this specific card, which most of their removal is also going to be an enchantment. It can just instantly shut out any Izzet player, just because a majority of those are instants or sorceries, so you can at least take away half their options. Any artifact tribal decks, just it has such a wide range and can just shut down so many strategies that this card is pretty important for that regards. End-Raze Forerunners. Vigilance, Trample, Haste. When End-Raze Forerunners enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +2 and gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. This is one of our game-ending cards. We can easily go wide with this, slap this down, and possibly take at least one opponent out, depending on our board state. Multani Ivarmi's avatar is Reach, Trample, and Mutani gets +1/+1 for each land card you control and each land card in your graveyard. And then also, very important for this deck, is you can pay 1 and a green, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hands, return Multani from your graveyard to your hand. So this just gives you a way to, again, get additional landfall triggers off of lands you have already paid. It is very, very helpful in this deck, to be honest with you. And the best part is you can tap your 2 lands and then return the 2 lands that you just tapped to get Multani back into your hand. Reclamation Sage. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Sun Titan. Whenever Sun Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, just gives you a ton of recursion off of it, and we have plenty of targets to make it more than worth it to play Sun Titan in this deck. White Mane Lion has Flash. When White Mane Lion enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. I would definitely keep this backing if you have a key creature or a possible win condition, or maybe even your first Scoot Swarm token, or your first Scoot Swarm that's on the field. Just something that you really want to keep around or slightly annoy your opponents with. You can slap this down, take that card back to your hand, and that way it just wastes one of their removal options for it. And Yasharn Implacable Earth. When Yasharn enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic forest card and a basic plains card. Reveal those cards, put them into your hand. Players can't pay life or sacrifice non-basic or non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So Yasharn can just straight up just shut down certain win cons. Like a Turgra deck against a Yasharn literally can't do anything until it removes this card, and a lot of Turgra decks mostly focus around sacrifice removal instead of spot removal. So this is a very good way of shutting down very certain strategies depending on what you're playing against. And worst case scenario, just searches you 2 lands. Alright, going on to the utility spells. Dusk to Dawn. Destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, or return all creature cards with 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So Dusk might not be too terribly helpful. We do have a ton of higher powered creatures than 3, but this is mostly here for the Dawn effect, which can also get us a bunch of our ramp creatures back into play as well. So it has a little bit of extra utility on that. Our Revelation, the spell costs 3 less. If there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield, destroy all non-land permanents. Overrun. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. Overwhelming Stampede. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. These 2 cards are some of our win cons, just overwhelming might and trying to body at least 1, maybe 2 opponents. Shatter the Sky. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. All of these wrath effects are mostly here for in case if there is someone who's producing just an absurd amount of tokens or is going even wider than us and we don't really care about our creatures. Like if we just have all of our ramp creatures on the field, we don't really mind losing a Farhaven Elf compared to a complete board of tokens. So it's very situational, but it is nice to have that option so we don't get taken out by the other go wide strategies. Sylvan Awakening. Until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. So this is just kind of a little bit more of a cheeky way to get additional damage and or additional creatures to overwhelm an opponent with. Banishing Light. When Banishing Light enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. It's just spot removal for literally anything that's on the board. Collective Blessing is a very expensive enchantment. Creatures you control get +3/+3. So this is just a huge bump in power for all of our creatures, especially if they're just the little mana dorks that we have lying around. Dark Steel Mutation. Enchanted creature is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness of 0/1 and has indestructible and loses all other abilities, card types, and creature types. And also Kinrith's Transformation. Enchanted creature, when Kinrith's Transformation enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is green elk creature and base power of toughness 3/3. These two cards are very mean, but I just could not help myself to include into this deck to get rid of a Blightsteel Colossus, anyone's commander who their entire deck is built around. This is a very, very mean way to remove someone's key creature. It's just absolutely love it. Garruk's Uprising. When Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card, and then creatures you control have trample. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. We might not get a ton of card draws off of this, to be honest with you. It's mostly here just to give every one of our creatures a trample effect. Camilla's Wheel. Well, choose one. If you control a commander, you can cast this spell. You may choose both. Until end of turn, any number of target lands you control become 1/1 elemental creatures with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. Choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So more than likely our commander will be out because it is indestructible. So we will be able to not only increase or change all of our creatures into 1/1 indestructible creatures, we will also be able to pretty much spot removal anything on the battlefield. Make a Stand. Creatures you control get +1 and gain indestructible until end of turn. You can do this to make a very ballsy alpha strike, or more importantly, since we are going with a wide strategy, we are susceptible to other board wipes. So this is a majority of the reason, or a majority of the times is what we'll use is for board wipe protection specifically. March of the Multitudes has Convoke and create X/1/1 white soldier tokens with lifelink. Late game, if in case we just have an absolute crazy field right before it's our turn, slap this down, literally tap everything, and pretty much double our creatures, is a very, very cheeky way to overrun our our 3 opponents. Return of the Wild Speaker. Choose one, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. As long as we have a trample effect, this should, if we do Alpha Strike, this should take out an entire, or at least one person on the table. Just this card alone. Return to Nature is just a very, very nice utility creature, or utility spell. It can destroy a problematic artifact or enchantment, in case if it's a Paradox Engine or Overwhelming Splendor or anything like that. It is just a very key card that just like pays for itself 90% of the time. And then it also has exile target card from a graveyard in case you are going against a reanimation strategy. This is a very mean way to kind of counteract their key creature that they just chose to dump a awesome reanimation spell, like Reanimate. Like, this is just like a very fun way to just say no one time. Rootborn Defense. Number 1, you can populate it, and then creatures you control are indestructible this turn. Again, mostly here for board wipe protection, but we do have a little bit of token strategy, so populate could come in very handy. Sejuri Shelter. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. This is just a very nice way to possibly more or less give one of our creatures hexproof for a spot removal spell. Unbreakable Formation. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and if you cast a spell during your main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So again, this is board wipe protection, but it can also possibly be a massive board pump and Alpha Strike card, depending on the situation, and I just love that little bit of added utility. And then we have White Sun Zenith. Again, cast this right before our turn, and create X 2/2 white cat creature tokens. Shuffle White Sun Zenith into its owner's library. So again, this is just a very great way to get a ton of tokens onto the battlefield, make our board even wider, and possibly Alpha Strike the next turn. Alright, so let's go on to the value. For Card Kingdom, this deck came out a little bit more expensive than what I normally like. Most of our cost comes from the certain Landfall cards that we have, and some of our other ones come from some of our win cons being about $2 or $3 a piece. On TCG Player, we come out much better. This came out to about $39.51, but that is without shipping. And the average Karametra deck is $338.40. That is on Card Kingdom, so just be very aware of that situation. And I'm really proud for what we did for going, let's just say roughly 15% of the average cost budget. We were able to get I feel like a very competitive Landfall deck that honestly it just has a lot of little charm to it, and I'm very proud of this deck, and I hope that you guys have fun with it too. So we'll go on to the lore. Karametra is the Theros god of hearth, agriculture, and harvest. She values community, stability, and the balance of nature. She used to be actually a little bit more bloody in the past, and actually demand blood sacrifices. And fun fact, the Minotaurs of Theros actually still follow that line of thinking when it comes to Karametra. So that's kind of a more unique thing. And if you look at her card art on the right hand side here, you can actually see her scythe. And obviously that has to do with the harvest, but it also has to do with a little bit of life and death, or also the balance of nature, which she values alongside community and stability. And Nylea is her sister, and obviously Nylea is on the bottom here. She is the goddess of the hunt, also on Theros. She is our mono green god of Theros. All right. That is everything, guys. I really hope you guys do enjoy this. Again, I'm sorry it came out just a little bit late for Thanksgiving, but this is my Thanksgiving-themed commander deck this year. If you have any concerns or comments, please leave them down below. I would love to hear from you guys, and I hope to see you next time.